Hello, my name is Warren Rutherford, and I'm here to present for the Internet Session Global Conference on Business and Finance for the Institute for Business and Finance Research, our paper on strategic SME succession planning, enhancing value and wealth vis-a-vis organizational diagnosis. Baby boomers and other business owners are divesting their small and mid-sized enterprises for various reasons. Absent a well-planned business succession plan, decades of knowledge, innovation, and wealth can be lost both for stakeholders and society alike. Although succession planning has been a strategic management component for a number of years, only recently has it become recognized for its importance, particularly as it relates to the creation of value that renders mergers, acquisitions, and strategic alliances possible, thus resulting in the continuation of that SME's past and current efforts. Only since 1991 has intellectual capital and intangible assets of SMEs started to become recognized as a trove of untapped wealth that could enhance the value and continuation of any business. Notwithstanding the current difficulty in quantifying intellectual capital and intangible assets, we propose in this presentation that through the combination of strategic succession planning with organizational diagnosis, may a forthcoming exit stakeholder identify internal business assets that may be improved upon to maximize value and wealth for the SME, while simultaneously improving the chance of transition success at the time of exit execution. Exploration of this subject matter may serve to provide scholars and practitioners fodder for theoretical and empirical research and practical application. Our presentation will review the following elements: value creation, strategic succession planning for small and medium business enterprises, intellectual capital and intangible assets, a commentary and case study to illustrate our paradigm, organizational diagnosis, and concluding comments on how we as practitioners and scholars can move towards realization of this new paradigm. There is little literature consensus as to what value creation is, the process by which value is created, and the mechanisms to create, capture, and retain value. We suggest that the creation, capture, retention, and liquidation are four progressive and distinct processes. Alternatively, failure to maintain what value that has been created is value depreciation, as posited by Porter. Each of the four processes can be examined from an individual, organizational, and societal perspective. It's a well-established, if not a generally accepted belief, that innovative organizations create new value when they use their individualistic, collective knowledge to introduce new products, processes, practices, and services. Brown and Eisenhart have researched and found that innovation tends to occur during times when enterprises face uncertain environments. Edvinson's definition of intellectual capital is a good description that continues to remain strong, which is in the possession of knowledge, applied experience, organizational technology, customer relationships, and professional skills that serves to provide an organization with a competitive position in a specific marketplace. Despite the number of definitions available, almost all involve some element of profit and value creation. Accordingly, intellectual capital and intangible assets may be seen as a driver of future earnings and thus become the forefront of research and practice. As this chart illustrates, the estimate of the total value in the United States of intellectual capital has increased in 2005 from $5 trillion to $9.2 trillion in 2011. And when you include economic competencies with intellectual capital, that estimate increases to $14.5 trillion in 2011. The economic importance of these broad developments lies in the central role played by new ideas in the growth, productivity, and incomes of modern economies. Economists estimate that innovation in its various forms accounts for 30 to 40% of the gains in growth and productivity by the American economy during the 20th century, more than any other factor. Moreover, in recent years, the pace of innovation and its impact has and continues to increase. Kuganison, Petty, and Finch examined the average intensity of intangible assets in 24 industries. In 2006, it was discovered that an industry's value as a share of an industry's total market value was more than 79%. For the period from 1975 through 2015, the percent of intellectual capital has significantly increased. Accordingly, this study, amongst others, provides increasing evidence that the drivers of value creation in modern competitive environments lie in an organization's intellectual capital rather than in its physical and financial capital. While there's an increased amount of value being created, there's also an increasing amount of value depreciation, particularly in view of the fact that there could be more than 5 million business owners in the United States alone, either dying or retiring over the course of the next 15 to 20 years. In 2011, the first baby boomer in the United States reached the age of 65. At an approximate rate of 10,000 workers per day, it will take until 2030 before the baby boomer generation will be fully retired. Therefore, an issue that appears to be ripe for review and to partially address in this paper is the process of orderly transference of enterprise-created value and wealth from one generation of stakeholders to an ensuing generation of stakeholders. In prior work, we know that today's performance drivers include a company's intellectual property, its strategy, brand, systems and processes, access to capital, off-balance sheet items, customer reputation, and its executive team. Otherwise, these are categorized as intellectual capital or intangible assets. Succession planning is an important component of business management because the orderly transfer of leadership, whether internally or externally, determines a company's future strategic direction and performance. Entrepreneurs who seek to exit from their business have three broad categories to choose from: decide to sell their business, transition that business to those closely related to the exiting owners, or decide or be forced to cease operations of their business. Evidence regarding organizational succession has been mixed in both management, economic, and organization literature. Although there are mixed reviews concerning organizational succession over the past 50 years, the concept of intellectual capital and intangible assets has added a new dimension as to how organizational succession is now viewed. Succession planning is seen as an important organizational resource that sets the path for an enterprise's strategic direction by focusing on the unique knowledge, skills, abilities, perspectives, and experience that an owner and other senior management may bring to the succession process. The concept of intellectual capital was first proposed by economist James Galbraith in 1969. Its first notable appearance occurred in the early 1990s when the subject matter was addressed by Fortune magazine in 1991. And the first book by William Hudson titled Intellectual Capital: How to Build It, Enhance It, and Use It appeared in 1993. In reviewing the bulk of intellectual capital and tangible asset literature, one cannot but notice an impressive array of conceptual work on the nature and constituent elements of intellectual capital and intangible assets. For instance, those by Edvinson and Malone and Vis-à-vis. In a knowledge-based economy, intellectual capital and intangible assets commences the replacement of financial capital as the source of value creation and enhancement for modern enterprises. For accounting researchers, the difference between the market value of the entity and the book value of the entity's identifiable assets is defined as goodwill, which is slowly becoming equated with intellectual capital and intangible assets. For non-accounting researchers, they define intellectual capital as the difference between the firm's market value and its book value of entity. We tend to concur with the Economics Institute of Washington when it expresses its understanding of intellectual capital and intangible assets as the economic value of the nation's productivity as dependent more upon employees' skills and knowledge and business problem-solving aptitude than it does upon the market value of the firm's commercial output. Many case-based and large sample empirical studies on the relationship of IC and IA and its performance implications in various contexts has been and continues to be undertaken worldwide. Based on numerous qualitative and quantitative studies, it appears that the possession of IC-IA leads to superior organizational performance. That is, a significant portion of IC-IA is correlated with high performance. From a performance aspect, while the level of IC and IA and how it impacts on performance has been thoroughly researched, only a handful of studies have empirically examined how the strategic management of intangibles impacts value creation. It appears that there have been numerous attempts to categorize intangibles in a general convergence towards a three-grouped framework consisting of human capital, organizational structural capital, and customer relational capital. This framework has been extensively studied and has withstood the test of time with little variation and is now considered a staple of intellectual capital. However, Annie Brooking opined that a fourth category, titled intellectual property assets, should be added to the intellectual capital genre developed previously. Let's illustrate with commentary our case study to illustrate how strategic succession planning and organizational diagnosis creates and enhances value. In 2008, I was requested to work with company ABC, a 20-year-old marine repair company. The owner at the time was 60 years old. It was a 10-month seasonal business with 7 full-time employees. The owner expressed a desire to develop a transition and succession plan as there was too much effort for him to manage the business in its growth at his age. He had $525,000 in annual revenue, $590,000 in annual operating expenses with no discretionary earnings. There were no owned real estate and approximately $150,000 in tools and equipment. He had no budget, no business plan. He was working in, not on the business. And in the prior 8 years to my coming on board, he had executed poor to bad business decisions, which required him to acquire $400,000 in funding for the company that was drawn on a personal home equity loan. His goals, as developed, included development of a transition and succession plan to enable him to retire, to preserve and improve the company during the time that a comprehensive transition and its succession strategy was implemented and executed, and to develop a transition and succession plan which eventually would allow him to sell in 8 years, with the last 3 years showing no debt and a continued increase in tangible and intangible assets. As a next step, I conducted an assessment of the business to identify how to enhance and retain company value with the hope of transference without significant capital depreciation. Organizational diagnosis is a method used for analyzing a business to identify shortcomings so that those shortcomings would be neutralized through change. Organizational diagnosis is a parallel concept related to the concept of organizational analysis, to which there is a distinction between the two concepts. Organizational analysis is in many ways similar to organizational diagnosis. The main resemblance between the two lies in the fact that both methods focus on understanding the organization's content. It could be said that organizational diagnosis is a specific form of organizational analysis, a form that focuses on undertaking organizational change for improving organizational performance and valuation. The predominant role of a robust diagnostic model is to explain an understanding of the business along with its strengths and weaknesses within the business. Ironically, the main advantage of those models is often at the same time its main disadvantage. By simplifying reality, the diagnostic model can make it easier to understand the business, but by doing so, the model can place consultants and management in a situation where they can understand the multidimensional reality and accordingly act in a one-dimensional manner. By overlooking other important dimensions of the business, except the one addressed by the specific diagnostic model, they can become prisoners of each model used and thereby use just one perspective. The main task of these diagnostic models, it must be remembered, is to simplify reality. In our case study, ABC's intellectual capital and intangible assets needed to be addressed along with the creation of a transition and succession strategy. The transition and succession strategy included both a personal transition and a business transition. The former focused on the personal plans for physical health, intellectual stimulation, recreational and creative activities, activities with partner and family, residence, social connections, spirituality and faith, income-producing work, and volunteer philanthropic lifestyle choices. The latter focused on legacy, finding the best new owner, and identifying the why and how to ways to increase company value. I took a deep dive with the company's inner workings in order to develop a transition and succession strategy. Here are the findings. First, the bookkeeper and controller needed replacement, an example of human relational capital. Cutting-edge accounting software programs were not fully utilized, structural capital. Customer service, sales, marketing, and financial review processes had been non-existent and needed to be developed and implemented, rational and structural capital. The mechanics' billing rates did not contemplate for time off, overhead, or profit, financial capital. Account receivable aging process was over 120 days. There was no budget, no business plan, financial and rational capital. Customer service procedures, marketing upsell activities to existing customers were non-existent, rational capital. Now here were some additional significant items. Customer service, relational capital, was often performed late. There were numerous instances of change orders resulting in not only an increase in billing, but unsatisfied customers. Marketing did not exist, human relational capital. New customers came by referral from existing customers. In the management arena, relational capital, the owner indicated to me that he could not locate and retain staff to complete a job on time and within the service quote. Additionally, he indicated staff was regularly absent from work and didn't follow his instructions very well. Upon further investigation, I identified that the owner managed as he was taught, essentially practicing yelling and telling. It obviously wasn't working very well. I coached him in the practice of asking and tasking, and within the period of 60 days, many of the items cited were addressed. Procedures and processes were developed and implemented, and these resulted in significant short and longer-term benefits. Let's go over some of the results based on changes recommended and instituted. Over 8 years, as these changes were instituted, the following accomplishments were revealed. The business transition plan focused on an internal sale to a motivated and inspired technician and the continued development, implementation, and expansion of the processes developed. At the end of the first year with them, revenues approximated $625,000 in sales with a net profit of $90,000 for the first year post-recovery. And second and subsequent years, net profit was near $100,000 adjusted for increased costs of doing business and not the initial $155,000 increase. In 2016, 8 years later, the owner, as planned, sold ABC to his senior technician for approximately $450,000, including the lease and tools and equipments, thus permitting him to exit the business with $525,000 of intellectual capital and intangible asset value captured. And although he sold the business for the net amount necessary to pay off his home equity loan, the owner retained, on an average, approximately $75,000 per year over a 7-year period, which happened to be 1 year of the company's initial annual sales revenue. He completed and achieved his transition and succession plan. In turn, the successor, that senior technician, acquired a solid and growing base of customers along with a team of highly skilled and motivated technicians and staff who valued their customer first, provide excellent repair, maintenance, and upsell activities. Transition planning and succession planning, in conjunction with organizational diagnosis and assessment, served to retain this business's value, but also served to prevent the potential loss of personal wealth. Succession planning is not a new concept. Organizational diagnosis is not a new concept. And intellectual capital and intangible assets are not new concepts. We are proposing that there is a new way of looking at how value can be created, captured, retained, and liquidated by using succession planning and organizational diagnosis and assessment with the perspective of exploiting non-tangible assets, intellectual capital, and intangible assets, so that business value may be converted into a liquid asset upon transference of the very entity that created the liquidated asset. A secondary effect of this case study is the issue of timing. In the cited case history, ABC's owner was 60 years old when he made the decision to consider developing a transition and succession strategy. Although it took until he was 68 years of age, he continued to create value even just prior to liquidating the value created. Naturally, commencing execution of a strategic succession plan earlier would only have served to provide for an earlier exit from the business or greater value capture and liquidation. It is possible, and we encourage our fellow colleagues to identify, contemplate, research, and publish other means to create, capture, retain, and liquidate business value. This research process may be accomplished by considering the various categories of intellectual capital and intangible assets, human, structural, and relational, and their respective subcategories. The scope of examination may be enlarged when existing management tools are applied, as we have done in the context of this paper. We believe that by shifting the paradigm in which we envision business value and personal wealth, the inter and intra-relationships between the various categories and subcategories of intellectual capital and intangible assets will only serve to provide a fertile field for value research and the subsequent implementation of means and methods to individual, organizational, and societal value. With this, I conclude the presentation of our Internet Session Global Conference on Business and Finance Research for the Institute for Business and Finance Research. My name is Warren Rutherford, and along with Dr. Michael Flynn, we encourage you to contact us to further pursue the concepts and recommendations outlined in this presentation and paper. Thank you very much.